Eva, you're on.
I am on.
You're on. So you're the host for the evening. You can introduce us in our program and then proceed with the proceedings.
All right, very good. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming tonight. We have a series of tellers, very different from each other. And we're going to start with Elderberry, also known as Barry McWilliams, our president of the Seattle Storytellers Guild. And Barry has been telling stories since he started telling at summer Bible schools way back in the 80s, long before he was part of our guild. Tonight, he's going to share one of his favorite stories from 1995. Now, in storytelling years, that's like a newborn. So, Barry, you're on.
Just a second, I got a spotlight.
Yes, Barry is also our tech guy, guru. So, there you go.
Well, as I said, this story is from 1995, and I used to tell a lot of stories at our church, Bible school stories and the like. And this story actually comes from the Bible, though it's certainly been fictionalized and adapted to an our gang kind of theme. And it's from the book of Nehemiah. And it's called, It Was Myers' Idea to Fix the Fence. Of all the kids I've known, and there have been quite a few friends I've had, there has never been one braver than Meyer. And I got a route. Okay.
Yeah. Hold on, Barry. I'm going to ask everyone to turn on their microphone. Patty,
oh, yes.
Janet, Colleen is off.
Okay, there we go.
Very good. Thank you all.
Okay. There was never one that I knew that was braver than Meyer. Now, Meyer was a little guy. I mean, he was knee-high to most grown-ups, but knee-high Meyer was just a courageous, brave guy, and he was new in town. Now, there was a gang of us, they're good friends of mine. There was Melvin and Lemmy, who were not brothers, but everybody thought they were. There was Spike, Mike, and Ike, who were brothers. There was Bub, his sister Cherry, and her friend Dot, and we allowed the girls in our gang because her mom said we had to. We used to hang around a lot in this vacant lot. Now, it was a lot with a fence that was falling down, and a lot of the boards were missing, and there was a lot of junk scattered around, but there was a perfect climbing tree in the corner. And you know, even though there were blackberries and trash around and stuff, we always thought, you know, if all this stuff was gone, this would be a really great sandlot baseball diamond. We could play ball here a lot. It'd be a lot of fun. Well, unfortunately, though, next door lived Sam Bullitt and his two dogs. His two dogs, Toby and Gruesome. Now, Toby was one of those little yapping terriers, and he would chee and make a lot of noise and stuff. Gruesome, on the other hand, lived very much up to its name. It was a hound dog, and one eye was blind and hanging out, and it would very quickly chase us up that tree. Fortunately, it was a very good climbing tree. Well, Sam Bullitt would oftentimes come over when we were playing there, and he would sick his dogs on us. And we'd go rushing for the tree and climb up. Well, anyway, we were sitting up there in the tree on one of those beautiful days when it's cool and the breeze is blowing through the leaves, and talking about how great it would be to have a baseball diamond here and maybe a tree house in this tree. Well, it was Meyer's idea to fix the fence. I wasn't there when it happened, but Meyer got this idea, and he went to old Cyrus McCormick, the guy that owned the hardware store, who also owned that vacant lot. And he told Cyrus McCormick that this lot would make a really good park, and I don't know how he talked him into it, but somehow he got permission from him to fix the fence. He even talked him into giving him a few sacks of old nails and a pile of old boards that were out in back of the lumber. And so we got Mike and Ike's wagon, and we loaded up that lumber, and we had to make a number of trips, and we did it real quick, but it took us all day. But it seemed like quick as we were doing something, you know, and we were all set. The next day, Meyer, since it was his idea to fix the fence, took charge, and he assigned us each a position to work. And so Melvin and Lemmy were put over there on the north side, and Spike, Mike, and Ike had the back, and Bub and Cherry and Dot, the two girls, they were over on the south side, and Tom Alley and me and Meyer were working on the front where the gate was. Well, we got started. There was a lot of pounding, a lot of noise, a lot happening. All of a sudden, it started getting quiet. Now, me and Meyer started to wonder what was going on, and so we went and investigated. We went first over to where Mel and Lem were, and we found they was having an argument, and they was very upset. You know, what's the problem, said Meyer. And they said, well, this is the problem. It doesn't show on very well on the screen. There we go. They said, here's the nails, and half of them have the heads on the wrong end. What are we going to do? Well, Meyer, he said, that's no problem, because those nails are for the other side of the fence. Just use the ones that are have the heads on the right end. You'll be fine. So then we headed over to Spike, Mike, and Ike, who, like being brothers, were arguing a lot. Now, they knew about the nails. They knew that the heads on some of them were on one end and on some of them on the other end, and so they had sorted them all out into 2 bags. But for some reason, they were all mixed up in the bags, and they kept blaming each other and worrying about, getting all upset. And finally, Meyer, he said, what you got to do is you just pull out a nail. If it's the right one, use it. If it's not, put it back in the bag, and you can use it later on the other side. So they got to work, pounded away, and we went over then to the south side where Bub, who was a little guy, and his big sister, Cherry, and her friend Dot were also having problems with the nails. Now, their problem with the nails was that some of them were long nails and some of them were short nails. And they were arguing about well, Meyer, he solved the problem real quick. He says, the long nails are for the long boards, and the short nails are for the short boards. Well, that satisfied, but they had one hammer, and they were arguing over who was going to use the hammer. Now, it seemed that Bub insisted, because he was the man, that he ought to be doing the hammering. But Cherry said, you can't, it's my hammer, my dad's hammer, and you can't insist on doing that. Well, finally, Meyer talked him into compromising. He says, Bub, since he's short, he can nail the lower boards, and Cherry, since she's taller, she can nail the top boards. Well, we was working along pretty good there finally, and along comes Sam. And he sicked his dogs on us, and we ran for the tree, and we climbed up there, and he walked around and looked at what we were doing. And the dogs were down there at the bottom of the tree. They were barking at us, and he was laughing at us, and he said, you think you're going to fix this fence? Well, it's going to be pretty flimsy. And he shoved some of it down, and after a few minutes of making more fun of us, he and his dogs left. Well, what are you going to do? Meyer got an idea. He says, we will have a special whistle, and we will blow this whistle, and we whistle whenever we have the bullies coming with the dogs. So we got back to work. Now, it was getting hot. Everybody was starting to complain about this and that. And then they started practicing the whistle, which slowed things down considerably because there were many false alarms. And at one point, Tom Alley tripped over some junk just because he was trying to run for a false alarm with that whistle. But we worked at it, and by the time the evening was over, we was about half done. Well, the next morning we went back to work. And it wasn't too long before Sam Bullitt showed up again. This time he didn't have his dogs with us, but he was threatening us. He says, I know about you guys, and I'm going to go tell Cyrus McCormick how you've been stealing stuff out of his shop and other things like that. Now, we'd never done anything like that, but he was making up these lies, and he was going to go tell Cyrus McCormick about it, and that will put a stop completely to us fixing that fence. Well, then Spike says, well, Sam, maybe I should tell Cyrus McCormick about that baseball you hit through his window last week." Well, at that, Sam kind of shut up and left. I think he didn't want Cyrus McCormick to hear about that baseball. So we got back to work, but we were having problems. For one thing, we were running out of boards. You know, we used most of the boards we had, and we still had some nails, but the short boards and long boards were pretty much all nailed up at this point in time. So we started picking up the junk and piling them in the holes in the fence. And then we started cutting down the blackberries and weaving them into kind of a fence to put in some of the other holes. We got all scratched up. But the blackberries was good. And then there was the shed. Now, there was an old rickety shed in the corner, and Meyer had told Mr. McCormick that he was going to get sued if that shed fell down and hurt somebody, and he got permission to tear it down. And so we tore down that shed, pulled the nails out. Most of them were bent, but we thought maybe we could use a few of them. We saved just enough boards to build a treehouse and went back to work. And by the time the sun was starting to get low on the horizon, we were done with the fence. Well, the next morning, we were just starting to look over our newly fenced-in park when Sam Bullitt and a couple of his big buddy friends and the dog showed up, and he had an axe. And he was going to chop down that fence, and he was going to cut down that climbing tree, but first he was going to beat up on Meyer, and then he sicked his dogs on us. He had busted a hole in the fence, the dogs came running through, we headed for that tree, and we climbed like crazy, all except Meyer. Meyer stood at the base of that tree and says, "Before you chop this tree down, you're going to have to deal with me." And he looked up at Sam. And Sam looked down at him, and the dogs, they were barking, but for some reason when Meyer looked at them, they kind of pulled back too. I don't know what it was in his eyes, but those dogs was uncertain about this. And then the friends started kidding Sam. They said, "Come on, why don't you beat up on the little guy? Let's bash him real good." Well, for some reason, he was cowed by all this. His friends left. Finally, he turned his back and he left, and he didn't come back and bother us anymore. Well, we had our fence fixed. We had our tree. We were all starting on our tree house. We cleared out, made a nice sandlot, baseball field there. We got our tree house built. We even had those curtains the sissy girls had us put in. And then Spike and Mike and Ike's mother made us a sign, and it said, "Cyrus McCormick Park. No bullies or dogs allowed." And we put it up over the gate, and we enjoyed our park, all because it was Meyer's idea to fix the fence. Thank you. Okay, let's see. I got to switch over the spotlights here.
Okay. Thank you, Barry. Just think about the trials and tribulations young kids go through just to have some fun. I want to say that, Sylvana, you are on deck. Marty Falls Shore is our next teller.
Marty's next. Okay.
Storytelling can act like a virus. Marty caught that bug while attending the Northwest Folk Festival, where she heard fairy tales, ghost stories, tall tales, you know the lines. Mm-hmm. Tonight, Marty is going to tell us a classic story. Marty?
My computer's messing with my head. It's COVID times, and we've been isolated about a year and a half, but we're kind of lucky. My husband, Dale, and I live in a very park-like area. We have a couple of acres with a lot of trees, and a room that looks out back at all the trees. And it's a window-lined room. We call it our atrium. And I spend a lot of time there knitting or reading and watching the birds and other wildlife that come through our yard. So we've got it relatively good here, despite all the bad news going on. We get out hiking. We hang out in the yard. Like I said, we play music. We have lots of ways to entertain ourselves. So on this day in particular, I'm knitting, sitting, looking out at the backyard, and we have mountains about a half a mile from the house that we can see from the atrium. And we live on the eastern side of Washington, which means we basically live in the desert. And we can see the tree line to the north on the mountains. To the north, there are all these trees, and then boom, they stop. There's a couple of strays to the south, but pretty much they stop because the rain has stopped and it's become desert. So I'm knitting, having a cup of tea, looking up now and then at the birds in the trees and the mountains. And all of a sudden, on the hillside, there's this monster, this hideous monster walking across the mountain from north to south. It's like the size of a semi-truck. It is huge. And it's on its back, it's got this bright fluorescent green carapace and these 8 legs, big wings that have these metallic scales on them, so they kind of sparkle in the sun. And that's just the body. Its head is about the size of the cab of a truck and is this fluorescent blue. It's actually kind of a pretty color. But what's really remarkable is it's got this tongue that it sticks out that's as long as its head. And I don't know how it gets it back in there, but it sticks it out and sucks it back in. And it's walking from the north, from the trees, down into the lower mountain, and it disappears. And I'm thinking, okay, yesterday was my second COVID shot. We heard the second COVID shot can be kind of weird. Is this something from the shot? Do I have COVID? So I pick up my tea. I can smell my tea, so that's still good, and I feel fine. So I kind of breathe, start my knitting again, and calm myself down. After all, it's a half a mile away. What's it going to do? I'm knitting, and I look up again, and there it is, coming back out from the south and heading north. This giant monster with its green and its blue and its wings and its feet, legs, and then it turns around and it looks at me, sticks out its tongue, and goes, roar! And I scream for Dale. Dale, get in here! And he comes running in, no idea what's going on, and I'm like, Dale, do you see that monster on the hillside, that giant green blue thing on the hillside? And looks. He says, no, I don't see anything. Where is it? I'm like, it's right there. It's heading toward the trees. It's this big green, blue, giant wings. It's heading to, I can't believe you can't see that. And he's, nope, don't see anything. Where is it again? And it's right heading into the trees. There it goes. It's going into the trees now. And he looks and he looks, and finally he looks at me and focuses in and says, "Do you mean that bug crawling on the window there?" And that's a story based on, very loosely based on an Edgar Allan Poe story called The Sphinx. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. I'm really glad, for one, that it wasn't what you thought it was. Okay, so now Anne Brender is on deck right after Savannah Clark. I am looking forward to hearing Savannah because I've never heard her before. Now, Savannah tells stories about her quirky life. This ranges from getting mobbed by mothers in Peru, appearing on a reality show on TV called Trading Spouses. Sounds like a lot of interesting stories she has to tell. And then about training her dog to star on TV commercials. I don't know what she has for us today, but I'm sure it's going to be interesting. Savannah?
Thank you. My husband and I are cheap. And one of the ways we can travel and be cheap is we do house sitting. And this is where we pretend we're little hermit crabs, and we basically go into someone's house and take care of their pets in their house when they go on vacation. So we have been hermit crabs at a house in Luxembourg, a condo in Japan, Germany, Spain, all over the world. We've been house sitting. Now, what happens is every day I subscribe to this website. So every day I get about 25 listings of people looking for house sitters. And then you apply. And if you get selected, you go and live in their house and take care of their pets. So there was a listing that said it was a woman named Wendy. She lived in Portugal, and she said her house was right next to a castle in a medieval town with cute little shops and restaurants. And it was just a delightful place. So I applied, and 8 minutes later, I get an email saying, yes, I want you to come. And she gave us the date and the time where to be and what train station to get off of, because I was excited. I thought I'd never been to Portugal. I like castles, so this is perfect. But usually when you do a house sit and you apply, you email back and forth with the people. Maybe you Skype, you FaceTime, so you get to know them. So part of my brain is saying, slow down, Silvana, you need to know more about this house sit in this situation. But she said you can't reach her anymore. And then the other part of my brain was like a cheesy motivational poster that said, take a risk, live life to the fullest. 3 weeks later, we were in Portugal. We got off the train where Wendy had told us to get off, and we were in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing but desolate landscape, just this Portuguese tumbleweed going in front of us. We waited an hour, and this beat-up car comes screeching up. The lady rolls down the window and yells, I forgot you were coming. I was shopping. Get in the car. There's not much room. So we get in the car, and we've got our suitcases on our lap, and we're holding her toilet paper in the air because there wasn't much room. We get close to her house, and I say, Wendy, where's the castle? And she says, the castle only exists in my mind. And I was starting to get a little worried about this. We pull into Wendy's house. Her yard is littered with dog poop. There's paper flying everywhere. We go inside her house, and it reeks of puppy urine and warm canned dog food. In fact, she stirs the dog food with a spoon, and she takes the same spoon and she stirs the stew that she's making us for dinner. It's my own personal version of Hell's Kitchen. Wendy says, come on, I'll show you the pets. So we go outside, and there's a dog kennel. And inside, she says, these are my 2 donkeys. Now, my daughter had a horse. I know, those are 2 horses, but Wendy calls them her donkeys. She grabs an orange from a tree, throws it in, and says, oh, these donkeys love oranges. Make sure to give them oranges every day. And these poor horses, they're standing in this sludge of smushed up old oranges because they don't like to eat oranges. Follow me, says Wendy. We follow her to this huge covered cage. It was about the size of a kindergarten classroom, huge. She looks at Alan and says, if you value your face, you'll never go in that cage. The cage held her parrot. The parrot hated men and disliked women. His name was Cuddles. So she showed Alan how to take a peanut and go on the outside of the cage at the far, far end and kind of hold the peanut in there. This was to distract the parrot, so he would fly down to where Alan was, get the peanut. I was supposed to open the gate of the cage, run in 20 feet, change the food and water, come back and slam the door shut before Cuddles came to attack me. And I asked Wendy, couldn't we just move the food closer to the gate? And she said, oh, Cuddles only eats if the food is far away. So again, I'm getting pretty nervous, thinking, what have I gotten into? Then Wendy gets in her car and she starts to drive out the driveway. And she yells out the window, just make sure you get Randy walking again. He needs to walk by the time I get back. And I chase after her and I'm saying, stop, what are you talking about? She says, Randy became paralyzed a week ago. You've got to get him walking. Randy the rooster, of course. And then she drives off. So I go back to Alan and I tell him what's going on. And he says, let's find Randy. We look around and we find a rooster sitting in a pile of dust. There's flies all around. He's sitting in his own poop. It's just horrible. And Alan says, I think he needs water therapy. So we get a big tub with warm water. Alan holds Randy, puts him in the tub, hoping that Randy will do some sort of rooster swim stroke. Randy sinks. Still, twice a day, Alan holds Randy in the tub, and then I hold Randy's little scrawny rooster legs and I move them back and forth, hoping to build up strength. But a week later, Randy still can't walk. So Alan says, you know, I think I should build him a therapeutic walking device. He finds this big purse, cuts 2 holes in it, and we set Randy inside the bag with his legs hanging out, and Alan adds a bungee cord to the handle. So basically, this is like a Johnny jump up for roosters. And every day, after Randy's water therapy, we hold on to the bungee cord and we sort of bounce him up and down on the driveway, hoping his legs, his feet will touch the ground and push off and get strength. Week and a half, Randy still isn't walking. And I feel really bad because as house sitters, we try to do our best and we wanted to help these animals. Wendy comes back and she's not upset at all that Randy isn't walking. So we quickly say goodbye and we go off to be hermit crabs at a house in France where we don't have to rehabilitate a rooster. And a few days later, Wendy emails me. She said she finally took Randy to the vet. And the vet diagnosed Randy as having some rare worms. And these worms were eating all of his muscles and his internal organs. And the vet suggested that Wendy euthanize Randy the rooster. But Wendy took him home and she ate Randy for dinner. Thank you.
Ooh.
It's sad that it's true.
And this is, to me, sounds like a nightmare.
She ate all those worms. She's eating Randy and the worms. Yuck.
Okay, let's try to move on. So Anne is next, and Patty Zaitlin is on deck. So now Anne, let me tell you about Anne. She loves chocolate and stories and sharing and laughter. You can tell by her beautiful laugh. And she loves just more of all these. So while Anne tells a story, I will look for some chocolate. Enjoy.
Thank you, Eva. Well, I've got some animals in my story too, but nothing like Sylvana's. My story is called Pogo Stick. When I was 11, I wanted a horse. I was growing up in a Westchester County suburb of New York City. There was no way I was going to get a horse. I knew that, but that didn't stop me from wanting one. Oh, I heard the arguments, like, where are you going to put him in a stable? And where are you going to get the hay? And who's going to pay for the vet bills? And do you know how to find a blacksmith for the shoes? And I didn't know any of that, but I wanted a horse. And I knew that my horse needed to look just like Roy Rogers' horse, Trigger. I needed a Palomino. It needed to have those beautiful golden flanks and the long white mane and the long white tail. That was going to be my horse. And my horse was going to have the name Popcorn. Well, I didn't get a horse. I tried riding Santa Claus. Somehow that didn't work out. Maybe he couldn't fit it in the sleigh. I tried wishing on my birthday candles, and that was equally useless. I tried, I asked the Easter Bunny. But again, the Easter Bunny had trouble, I guess, fitting it in my Easter basket, so I went horseless. Then, my good friend, who was a year older than I had played Clue with her all summer. We'd sat on the floor of their TV room playing Clue. And it was not in the library with the candlestick. She got a horse. Not only that, her parents were going to pay for the stable and the hay and the vet bills and whatever horseshoes that horse needed, he was going to get. Oh, but what an animal. He was beautiful. He was an elegant chestnut with the shiniest brown coat. He stood 15 hands tall. His name, Commander. Definitely more panache than Popcorn. And he had a commanding presence about him. He was just a magnificent animal. And Janet said that I could have a turn riding him once she got the saddle. And then it was, well, once he got used to the saddle. And then it was, well, once he got used to Janet. And I never got to ride Commander. Well, I suppose I could have been down in the dumps. I suppose I could have been green with envy. But the dumps are never what they're cracked up to be. And I don't look good in green. So I had a different plan. I relied on my trusty pogo stick. I took my pogo stick out onto the front porch of our house, and I jumped like there was no tomorrow. I jumped and jumped and jumped without stopping. I jumped 103 jumps one day, and I was so pleased with that. I just kept right on going. I jumped right down the front steps of our home, right down the front walk, kept going, no stopping, made a left, hopped right along the sidewalk to the corner where there was a stop sign, but I didn't pay any attention to any stop sign. I just went right around that corner, right by the pine trees, and just kept jumping, all the way to the forsythia bush at the back corner of our yard. My brothers were playing stickball in the street. My older brother could whistle through his teeth without, it was just this shrill thing he could use at baseball games. And so he whistled real loud for me. And then my younger brother who is just a really, really good mimic, and he is even until this day. My younger brother pretends he's Red Barber announcing a New York Dodgers baseball game. And he says, so the youngster comes to the plate, bottom of the ninth, 3 men on, 2 outs, and she is going to ride that ball to deep center field and beyond. Well, this all just made me hoot with laughter, and I finally fell off the pogo stick. And then they had to try the pogo stick, but of course they were no good at it. I was quite practiced, of course. I grabbed my trusty steed back and kept hopping. And in the next few days, I put my cowboy hat on and I pulled that little wooden bead up on the string up under my chin, and I just jumped all over. And people in the town began to notice that Anne was never walking. She was always on her pogo stick. I even learned to take my hat. I could undo that bead and I could take my hat, hold onto the pogo stick with one hand and wave my cowgirl hat like I was at a rodeo. I also learned to hold that pogo stick between my thighs, and I could say, look, Ma, no hands, and I could still jump. It was phenomenal. One summer day, I had jumped and jumped and jumped morning, noon, and night. And when I went to bed, it felt as if my legs were still jumping. I lay there on my sheets. I was all hot and I just couldn't go to sleep. And my legs were jumping. And finally, I corked off. And I had this dream. I had a dream that I had a different kind of pogo stick. It wasn't one with a spring in it. It was one that had some special kind of air cushion. And you could inflate it with your bicycle tire pump. And so I jumped everywhere with this newfangled pogo stick, and I could go really, really high. I could go as high as the mulberry tree in the side yard, and I even got as high in the dream as my second floor bedroom window. And well, the church steeple in the downtown of the village started to lean over when it saw me coming because it was afraid that I was going to crash into it. And well, there was even a rumor that the Empire State Building ducked and covered when I came. It didn't want to be embarrassed because somebody was higher than it was. And then there came the part in the dream where I was going to compete against NASA's Mercury rocket, and I was going to compete against Alan Shepard, who was taking off in this rocket. And just as the flames started to shoot out from underneath the rocket and the rocket started to lift off, the blazing sun from sunrise came pouring into my bedroom and woke me up. Well, dagnabbit. But I wrote Alan Shepard about this dream, and well, he never wrote me back, and that's okay, because I guess he was really doing astronaut autographs for everybody, and so that's okay. And you know, come to think of it, Janet had quite an illustrious career as an equestrian. She went to the 1960 Olympics in Rome, and she rode horses there, and she won a silver medal in equestrian dressage. Oh, my brothers became sports broadcasters, and well, you know, Alan Shepard, I mean, his career as an astronaut just took off. But I didn't do too badly, actually, because I became an inventor. And I invented the very first in-house hot tub. Well, it had 3 candles underneath it to keep it hot, but the idea really never took fire. And I also invented a kind of umbrella that for two people, so that you could have your arm around your sweetheart under the umbrella without having the vertical piece bopping you in the nose the whole time. But my agent rained on that idea. And then I invented this new pogo stick that had this fantastic air cushion in it, or air cylinder, and I was able to bounce everywhere, and I could bounce really, really high, but for some reason the idea just didn't take off, and people didn't jump at the opportunity to come buy my pogo stick. That's all right, because I live in Seattle, and sooner or later I'm going to move from Seattle. I'm going to move into the countryside, and I know there's a Palomino out there waiting for me. I just know there's this beautiful golden horse with the white mane and the white tail, and I know we're going to ride off into the sunset together. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Oh, childhood dreams. Wow. Now, Patty Zeitlin is an author, playwright, award-winning poet, a singer-songwriter of 10 albums with messages of kindness and hope and compassion for children and adults. And man, do we need that today. Now, Patty is and has been our vice president, the vice president of the Seattle Storytellers Guild for the past 5 years. And she has a story for us this evening. Patty? And we need you to unmute yourself.
The story I'm going to share with you is based on a true story that I found. Two people made a picture book out of this true story. And I don't know if you can see let's see if you can see the picture here. Yeah. It's called Lost and Found Cat. Surah and her 4 daughters and son had to leave their home in Mosul, Iraq, because it became too dangerous and violent to live there any longer. The government would not allow them to leave, so she had to pay a driver, we call a smuggler, to get them to safety, away from the city. They were allowed to take only what they could carry in their arms, which was very little, but they could not leave behind their precious, beloved cat, Kunkush. They put him in a cat carrier and on the floor of the back seat, so he wouldn't be noticed. After 2 hours, the driver let them off near a forest where there was another man we call a smuggler. He was a man, and a group of other refugees who were trying to get away from the city that was so dangerous. He led them on a 4-day journey, walking through mountains, through forests, and whenever they stopped to rest, they would take the cat away from the rest so no one would know that they had a secret kitty there, and let Kunkush out and feed him. At the end of 4 days, they arrived in a Kurdish village. There they caught a bus to Istanbul, Turkey. They were always worried about patrols finding them, the ISIS patrols, and possibly sending them back to the most dangerous place at that time. They wanted, of course, nothing more than safety. They took this bus from the Kurdish village to Turkey. to Istanbul, and there they had to stay in 4 different apartments for the next 2 weeks. The cat was well taken care of during that time. They played with him and petted him and loved him. Then they boarded another bus with more refugees, and that was to take them to Izmir, Turkey, to a beach area. Many refugees were on that bus, so there was a crowd of them when they walked for 3 hours to board a boat. There were 60 people. The boat that appeared was only made for 25. They received, thank goodness, life jackets for the trip. Everyone got on this boat and it took on water and started to sink. In the process, Kunkush's carrier lid was broken. Volunteers from the shore came to pull them back to safety, so they did not drown. Meanwhile, though, Kunkush's carrier was moved to another place. Finally, they boarded the bus back. Actually, the carrier got back with them on the second trip. They had to reduce the number of people that went on that boat. Only 25 could go because it was so flimsy. It was just a rubber raft thing. Finally, they arrived on the island of Lesbos in Greece, but the carrier that Kunkush was in, the lid was broken. And when the volunteers helped them all out of that boat, someone placed the carrier near a wooded area. And because the top was open, Kunkush was frightened and wet and ran into the woods. The family was calling and calling for him, but he never showed up. They were just brokenhearted. The volunteers called and called, but no cat. They had to go on, this family, to safety. And so they boarded another boat or a bus, I don't know. Meanwhile, Kunkush ran and came to a fishing village where fishermen were throwing fish to stray cats, which were many. The cats, however, growled and hissed at Kunkush because he was a stranger. He couldn't stay there, so he ran on for who knows how long till he came to a little coffee shop in a town somewhere there. In that coffee shop was a woman named Amy. She was a volunteer there to help refugees, and she had heard that a family had lost their cat. When she saw Kunkush, she figured that was the cat. She did not know where the family was or what the cat's name was, but the poor cat was now muddy and bedraggled and starving. She took Kunkush to the vet, and the vet gave him shots and medicine, and then she shaved all the matted fur off of his body. Amy took him home and gave him a bath. And then in the days that followed, she noticed that the cat, whom she named finally Dios, a Greek god, Dios was going through different parts of the apartment and wailing. She figured because he was missing his family, she had to find them somehow. Now, she let a friend of hers who was a news reporter know about this story, and it went on the World Wide Web and on several news sites. She also posted on Facebook. In Norway, where the family had settled, by this time, the oldest daughter, Rahid, had learned some English. And they saw on the news site that Kunkush was there, although he was named Dios, but didn't know how to reach him. But the daughter, because she knew some English, was able to go on Facebook, and she found Amy, and how happy they were to see their cat alive and looking very well. But how were they going to get this cat all the way from the Isle of Lesbos in Greece to Norway, where the family had settled? It turns out that because it was on news feeds and the World Wide Web, people hearing the story were moved to donate money to cover all the vet bills and also transportation. back to Kunkush's home. Doug, who was a photographer who'd taken these pictures of the cat by now, agreed he would drive the cat to the plane. It took him 2 hours. And when he got there, the attendant at the airport looked at the carrier that the cat was in and said, "You cannot get on this plane. This carrier is too small. The cat can't turn around." By this time, a crowd had gathered and was watching this go on. Just at that moment, Kunkush turned all the way around in the carrier and was able to be boarded onto that plane. When Kunkush arrived at his home, his family was so happy to see him. "Ah, Mahabibi," they said, "my darling." And Surah smiled and said, "Now we are all safe." Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Thank you for that touching, lovely story. A lot of animal stories tonight. We'll see what Allison Cox is our next teller. And she lives in pursuit of spectacular vernacular to infinity and beyond. Allison.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Outside here on Vashon Island, a tree just fell over in my front yard, but so far I still have electricity. So if I suddenly blip out, you'll know why. But it only fits because the name of my story is Unexpected. Well, Bob was the first always to come to the meeting. He would come 45 minutes early just so he could set up the chairs. Originally, he wanted to set up the chairs so that they would line up with all the lines of the floor tiles. But I told him, "Bob, if we sit in a square, I can't see everybody's face." So he finally agreed he would set the chairs up in a circle as long as then he could pick where he would sit. Next to come that particular day to the meeting was Cindy, and Cindy stopped to show Bob that she had baby mice in her pocket. One of her issues was hoarding animals. Whenever Cindy would become suicidal and have to be hospitalized, I would find a cockatiel in a cage left outside my office door for me to babysit. She knew I was a soft touch for animals. So I said, "Cindy, you know, we've talked about bringing animals to group." She goes, "I know, but they're so small, I didn't think they'd count." And then she laughed because this girl could not lie if her life depended on it. I said, "Just keep them in your pocket and don't show them to anyone else." So more people started to shuffle in, and one of them was Patty. I was glad to see her because Patty had had a long, hard winter, and she was doing a lot better this spring. But when her schizophrenia would start to overtake her, she'd become frozen in time just to hold off those things that she was afraid of. And finally, last of all, came Tammy. Tammy liked to make a great entrance. She said, "Hi, I know I'm late. Am I in trouble?" And my partner, my coworker at the mental health center, Andrea, said, "Just take a seat, Tammy. We're about to start." And so it was the weekly meeting of the psychiatric support group where we would go around the group and we'd talk with everybody about how their week went and if they had challenges, maybe ways that, that we could meet those. And meanwhile, I'm thinking that this was going to be a challenging meeting for me as well, because today was the day I had to tell them all that I was leaving. And so after we made it all the way around the group, and it took a long time, then Andrea said, "Well, I suppose some of you might be wondering why we have a cake today. And that's because Allison is going to be leaving us. She got a new job offer in Seattle." "Seattle!" they cried, and they were up out of those seats that Bob had put so carefully on the floor, and they surrounded me as I stood up. And they started to say, "Seattle, no. Seattle has earthquakes and volcanoes. There's windstorms. There's tidal waves. There's floods." the collective paranoia of this group knew every single way that I could die by natural causes in the Northwest. And I said, no, it's going to be okay. My partner is a scientist. He'll be able to tell me if some of these things are coming and warn me. They looked dubious. But so Andrea used distraction. She said, on top of that, we have been given tickets for free for all of us to go to IMAX in Denver next week during our regular meeting time. And we have permission to use the mental health center vans to take us all there. Well, things started to look a little more like a celebration, but this didn't even begin to touch their sense of abandonment. And so as everybody got their piece of cake one by one, when they talked to me, I had to say over and over, I'm going to be here for 2 more weeks. And really, it's going to be okay. Well, 1 week later, driving that van, that was challenging. First, all the people that were assigned to my van gathered around the van, and the first thing I did was check Cindy's pockets to make sure nothing was going to crawl out of there while I was driving the van or sitting in the movie theater, even worse. And then we had to negotiate where everybody was going to sit, because I knew that Bob would want to sit in the front, and he was going to count every single knob on the front of that dash and count them out loud while I was driving over and over. And so I said, no, Bob, you have to sit in the back seat because Patty's going to sit in the front seat. She promised to help me navigate. Well, Bob was not about to be outdone in navigation. And so from the back seat, he read aloud every single road sign that we went by. And meanwhile, Tammy was sitting next to him going, make him stop talking. And then Cindy started to cry when she saw a dead raccoon on the side of the road. And so it went for 50 miles till we finally got to the IMAX theater just in time to get everybody out of the van and into the theater and into the seats just as the lights went down. Now, I had no idea what movie we were going to see. And it turned out to be a documentary on aerial photography in a little Cessna plane over the Hawaiian Islands. And I looked up and down the road to see if everyone was doing okay, and they seemed to be really enjoying it. But I was freaking out because every time that plane swooped down into a canyon and then pulled up and started to head towards a volcano and at the last minute just veer away, my stomach was not doing well with this. And so I was clutching the armrest and whimpering, going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And Patty, who was sitting next to me, leaned over and said, what's wrong? And I, with my eyes still glued to the screen, said, oh, Patty, oh my God, I'm just not really doing well with all this flying down and then swooping up again. And oh my God, it's really scaring me something awful. So Patty leaned closer and said, can you hear me? And I nodded, my eyes still on the screen. And she said, here's a hint. Close your eyes. And I did. And I laughed because of course it worked right away. And I laughed at myself and I turned to Patty and I said, you were right. Oh my God, Patty, you were right. I'm going to miss all of you so much. And she's reached over and put her hand on top of mine on the armrests. And she goes, I know. And then she smiled at me and she said again, I know, but it's going to be okay. And then because she had her hand on mine, suddenly it was okay. And I looked up at the screen and I could see that plane started to go up again. And then we turned and looked at each other and we both laughed. And then we looked up and watched as that plane flew up and up and up and away into the great blue unknown. Thanks.
Wow. So turns out we all need help in some way or another. We can all help each other.
Especially me. The 70-foot screen. I forgot to say that.
I'm with you, Allison. I'm glad we weren't there together, the only ones together, because I don't know if we could have helped each other.
We have to hold hands.
Yeah. We have another storyteller on deck. Susie Irwin has been telling stories since the 90s. She delights in telling stories about her travels, as well as animal stories from around the globe. And tonight, I think she has a travel story for us.
That's right.
Susie?
Yeah, I'm not telling animal stories tonight. Not much, anyways. So I wonder if anyone out there has ever made a decision by flipping a coin. Nope, I see no, I see yes. Well, year was 1977. I'm working teaching ESL in Santa Barbara. I love my students and I hated grammar. I couldn't wait for the semester to end. A few years before, I had worked on a fishing boat out of Kodiak. And so I thought, well, I think I'll go fishing. I knew a skipper in LA and I knew that he would be traveling north soon. So I called him up and I missed him. I was at a phone booth, no cell phones in those days. Outside the college, there was a line of students to make a phone call. Well, he'd already left. But the person behind me in line said, I heard you're going to Alaska. And I said, well, yeah, I want to. And she says, well, I'm going next week. You want to come with me? So we exchanged information, even though I didn't have a phone, and made a plan to meet. So I had been looking for work. And the day she showed up, I had gotten 2 job offers. I didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. And this was not the first time I didn't know what to do. So I flipped a coin and I packed my rucksack. I took my Red Wing work boots and met my friend and off we went to Alaska. We had gotten a ride to Oregon and then we hitchhiked up I-5 into Seattle and caught the ferry when it used to come in to town here. I don't know if any of you have ever taken that trip, but you can sit on the deck in your sleeping bag, and they have lounge chairs. So if you're fast and you get on the boat and zoom upstairs, you can find yourself a place in a lounge chair under these cafe heaters. It's actually pretty spectacular. And then you're up the inside passage. So usually the weather isn't terrible. This was June, and orca whales, minke whales, gray whales, you name it. The eagles were like crows. They were everywhere. So yeah, it's really a fabulous trip. We're going to Skagway. Now, that's about a 2-day trip. And once you get to Skagway, what you can do, or you may not want to do this, but what we did is hike over the Chilkoot Trail and then later hitchhiked through the Yukon and up into Alaska. We get to Skagway and it's 9 miles to the trailhead and nobody will pick us up. I am so mad at these Skagwayans. Anyways, we get to the gates of the Arctic Park and that's what it's called. And went up the valley a little bit and, we were wiped out. So set up camp, had something to eat, and then crashed. Well, I didn't go to sleep because outside all night long was this scratching and crawling around the tent. And I'm like, and I wake up in the morning and then up in a tree. Oh, I guess there are some animals in this story. There was a porcupine. So that was the biggest mammal we saw on this trip, thank God. It takes a couple days to hike up to the bottom of the pass. Now, some of you have probably seen that face of snow with a dark line crawling up it. Well, we were going to do that, and that's what it was. It was a face of snow, and there was no line because we were the hikers at that time, the Klondikers. Now, I think I mentioned that I had my Red Wing work boots. I don't know if you ever looked at the bottom of those, but they're slick as whatever. So I knew I wasn't getting over that mountain with those boots. And lucky for me, the Klondikers had been throwing stuff here and there all along the trail, and I found some baling wire. So I wrapped up my boots, and Diane was a woodswoman. So she went first and broke trail. Now we're going up this pass, and the snow is firming up. So she's like 10 feet in front of me, and I can't see her. Well, my knees started to go, shaking like you wouldn't believe it. So like a crab, I crawled over. There was a little rock outcropping over here, relieved myself, and then I crawled back. And then I proceeded to climb up like a bug on a wall. It was so scary. Talk about heights. Well, we get to the top of the pass, and there's this giant snowfield that went on for miles. And even though it was difficult, it wasn't scary. We get to the other side into the Yukon, and there's a couple of lakes at the headwaters of the Yukon. And this is where the Klondikers started their journey. They got to the other side, they got to these lakes, they would start cutting down trees and building boats, and then they would float down into the Yukon. Well, we didn't do that. We just walked down the trail. And today, when you're going, you can choose to take a train into the Yukon as opposed to hike the trail. And the train and the trail meet up. And we're hiking down the trail, and here comes the train, which is typically full of passengers from Princess Tours or somewhere. And all these people start handing us food out the windows. There's apples and cookies and chips, and it was something else. So we felt like a couple of bears. It isn't very far from Lake Bennett over to White House. So we hopped a truck and made our way into Whitehorse. And one of the things that we stopped at was a cemetery, at an Athabascan cemetery. So all the gravestones, there's no gravestones. They're all little spirit houses that are on, each of these plots. And they have windows in them. They're all painted. They were really neato. Okay, so back to the story. We're getting on the Alcan. So the Alcan was the only road from the lower 48 up to Alaska. And it was gravel. We hitchhike, we get a ride to this lake. There's a campground there, but my friend doesn't want to stay at the campground. So we go across the street and into the backcountry. And it was really incredible. There in the distance, you could see like 20 miles. It was flat, and there was a mountain and a glacier, and we were at the tip of the glacier. At that point, it had all turned to tailings, so it was sand. It was just these black sand dunes, and in the black sand dunes, there were all these bear tracks. So I said to my friend, "I'm not sleeping out here." So we stayed in a cabin that night, and the next day we went back over to the campground, figuring that we could find a ride. Well, sure enough, we found a fellow that had been driving from Boston, and he was tired, and he said, "Ladies, you can drive all the way to Anchorage if you want to." And he crawled in the back and went to bed. And so we took that little van and headed north. The first place that you come to is Tok Junction once you hit the border. And after that, there's not a whole lot till you hit Palmer. And we're driving south and hungry. So we pull over to this roadhouse. And there's hardly any cars there. So, oh, great, we'll get some food soon. We go in and sit down, and the waitress doesn't come. And the waitress doesn't come. And the waitress doesn't come. So finally, the waitress comes, and she takes our order, we order, and the food doesn't come. And the food doesn't come, and the food doesn't come. So Diane and I are getting a little bit uptight. The food comes, we eat it because we're hungry. We snarf it down and pay the bill. And then Lucius, our friend, puts down a $10 bill. Diane and I are going, no way. You know, this lady was just terrible. She's the worst service we've ever had. And Lucia said, you know, it seems like she could use a little uplifting today. Now, this was the first experience I'd had of discrimination. It wasn't the first experience that Lucius had had as a Black man. We learned a lesson that day, that there's more than one way to deal with discrimination. Lucius took us into town, dropped us off, and Diane went to work for Fish and Game, and I was stuck in town once again with needing to make a decision. But this time, I didn't need to flip a coin. I had found my destiny, and I ended up staying for 15 years. And that is all. The end.
Oh. Thank you, Susie.
You're welcome.
Wow. Some merit to flipping a coin. I'll think about that the next time I have a decision to make.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming this evening. There's one more story from me if you want to hang around and listen to it. Before I get into my story, I want to mention that the next StoryFest through our Storytellers Guild is on October 22nd at 7 p.m. Yes. And it has Joe Walter and Eric Boxman. And as you guys can see the screen that Joe is from the Kitsap Peninsula, and they will be telling stories, unbelievable stories that are true. So we hope you'll join us for that. And now for the last story of the evening. Barry, if you could clear that. Okay, thank you. All right, so this story is about an old woman who lived in a small town. And you know how small town living is, where everybody knows everybody. Yeah, well, it was kind of like that. Everybody knew this old woman, and they loved her. Everybody called her Mama Lou. Now, even though Mama Lou was old, well, she didn't sit around the house being bored. She had something to do out in the community every day of the week, just about every day of the week. I mean, on Mondays, she volunteered at the school. Tuesday, she was at the homeless shelter. Wednesday, she had something else to do. Just about every day of the week, she was in the community. But now on Thursdays, that was the day she reserved for the community to come to her. She stayed home on Thursdays. And anybody who wanted to find her, they knew when and where. This story happened on a Thursday. And that morning, Mama Lou got up and she made her cup of tea, sat that hot cup of tea on the table while she went outside, opened her gate wide for anybody to come inside. And after a while, she heard some footsteps. Mama Lou? Oh, well, that sounds like Jasper. Come on in, Jasper, come in. Morning, Mama Lou. Morning, Jasper. How you doing, Mama Lou? I'm doing fine, Jasper. I see your garden is weeded. Yes, I weed it little by little every day, and that gets the job done. Mama Lou knew Jasper didn't come over there to talk about her weeds. But, you know, she's wise. So she always let her guest speak first. And Jasper finally got around to it. Mama Lou, I got up this morning to pick my apples so I could take them to the market and sell them so I could have some money to live on. And, well, they're all full of worms. So I know I should have put netting over those trees, but well, I was wondering if you could just help me out with a little cash. Oh, now I see. Well, Jasper, you see that basket on top of the shiffer over there? The brown and basket with the African designs? Yeah, there's money in there for the community. You reach on up in there, take what you need, and you pay that money back now, because that's for the community. All right, Mama Lou, all right. Jasper went over and reached in that basket. Ooh, thick rolls of cash. Jasper took a whole handful, put it in his pocket. Another handful, and another, until all that money was gone. I'll pay you back, Mama Lou. Come spring harvest, I'll pay that back and more. All right, Jasper. Well, spring harvest came and went. No, Jasper. Another spring harvest came and went. No, Jasper. Oh, she saw Jasper now in town, wearing nice new clothes. And every time Jasper saw her downtown, why, he crossed the street. Another spring harvest came and went. No, Jasper. Oh, but she saw him riding in a car. Nice car, wasn't new, but it was nice. But every time that car passed by Mama Lou's house, it sped up. He floored it, didn't slow down enough to wave. 4 years later, on a Thursday, Mama Lou was sitting there sipping her tea, wondering, who gonna come by today? And then she heard footsteps coming toward the gate. And they stopped and went away. They came again and stopped, went away. Footsteps toward the gate. Mama Lou? Why, it's Jasper. Finally come to bring the money back. Come on in, Jasper, come in. He walked in there looking like a stray cat. Clothes all wrinkled, hair uncombed. Morning, Mama Lou. Morning, Jasper. How you doing, Mama Lou? Oh, I'm all right, Jasper. Getting old, but I'm all right. You know how that goes. Nice day, huh? Nice day, Mama Lou. Yes, Jasper. It's a nice day. She knew he didn't come there to talk about the weather. But she was wise. She always let her guests speak first, and Jasper finally got around to it. Mama Lou, I got a little problem. See, my car broke down, and I was wondering if you could help me out. I see. Well, Jasper, you know where the basket is. Reach on up in there. Oh, yeah, Mama Lou. Thank you, Mama Lou. Thank you. Jasper went over there, reached up. Mama Lou, this basket is empty. Is it now? Yeah, Mama Lou, look. Well, so it is. If you had paid that money back that you took 4 years ago, there would be something in there for you now. Jasper, you can't just take and take and take and never give. When she said that, Jasper heard his grandmother's voice telling him, son, when you know better, you ought to do better. Jasper swore to himself that he would do better, and he did. You better believe he put netting over all those apple trees. He weeded his vegetable garden. And then he went over to Mama Lou's, help her weed hers. And the older she got, the more time he spent over there, keeping her garden just the way she liked it. Not a weed in sight. Mama Lou had to slow down on all the activities she did out in the community. But every Thursday, she went outside and opened that gate wide. And people came, sometimes just to chat, a little visit. And sometimes they needed to reach on up in that basket, get a little help. And when they reached in that basket, they found out it was full because Jasper kept it that way. Mama Lou never had to put another penny in that basket. Yeah, Jasper, he never took another thing from Mama Lou. Wait a minute. Yes, he did. You know what he took? Mama Lou's good advice. That story, thank you. That story is based on a Nasruddin story.
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I want to thank all of the storytellers we had this evening. I'm going to call you by name because it was such a varied and wonderful program. Barry started us off. Elder Barry started us off. Marty, thank you for your monster. Sylvana, thank you for that nightmare. I'm sorry, I'm still. And thanks for Pogo Stick. And Patty, where are you? Thank you for that. Oh, there you are. Thank you for that touching story and for the kitty. Allison Cox, thank you for that great story. Susie, travel story, where are you? Thank you. And that's it. Thank you all.